You gave us permission to dig around in the yard and look around. And then we dig, and lo and behold, we find what looks like the remains of a human being. I'm going to ask you right now, are there any other bodies
No.
in your backyard?
Not that I didn't even know that one was there.
You guys are extra zoomed in. We're getting up close and personal. Hey guys, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Shayna, and in my little corner of the internet, we talk about spooky history of all kinds. If that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell because I upload every week. Or if podcasts are more your thing, I also have a podcast called Spooky History with Shayna Blake, and that's where all the audio of my videos go. So I'll be sure to have a link down in the description for you. Now today's episode was recommended by a subscriber, Erin. Thank you, Erin, for recommending this horrible story. And I really do appreciate it because I completely forgot about this horrible person until you reminded me. So thank you. Now, if you ever have any recommendations, be sure to leave them in the comments, or you can swing over to my Instagram and leave me a message there. So today, we will be talking about this sweet old lady, Dorothea Puente. So let's get into it. Now, Dorothea was born on January 9th of 1929 as Dorothea Helen Gray in Redlands, California, to the parents of Trudy Mae Yates and Jesse James Gray. I wonder if his parents were Jesse James fans. It's kind of a weird name, right? Now, her parents were both cotton pickers and unfortunately not the best people. They spent whatever little money they had on booze, and they both would abuse Dorothea. She would have to scrounge for food oftentimes because they just wouldn't feed her. Now, her father would end up passing away from tuberculosis in 1937, and her mother would die from a motorcycle accident in 1938. After that, she would be sent to an orphanage until relatives from Fresno, California would take her in. And with her having a rough childhood, she would often lie to people and say she was one of like 18 children and they were born and raised in Mexico. Not sure who would believe that, but she would tell those stories. And then in 1945, when Dorothea was just 16, she would end up marrying a soldier named Fred McFall. They would have two daughters between the years of 1946 and 1948. However, she would send one of them to live with relatives in Sacramento, California, and the other one up for adoption. Then in 1948, she would get pregnant again, but it ended up ending in a miscarriage, unfortunately. Fred would end up leaving Dorothea at the end of the same year in 1948. It's said that she would lie about this marriage often. She would claim that her husband died of a heart attack. I guess she was too embarrassed to say that he left her. I really don't know. But it was around this same time that her crimes would start. She would try to forge checks, but would soon be caught and would be sentenced to a year in jail and would get paroled just after 6 months. Now, not long after being released from jail, she would shack up with a man she didn't really know and would end up getting pregnant again. She would give birth to another daughter, but she would give this daughter up for adoption as well. I guess she really didn't want kids, which honestly is probably a good thing because of how much of a horrible person she was.
You got that right.
Then in 1952, she would marry a man named Axel Johansson, and this would turn out to be a 14-year-long marriage. She was a very busy woman and was not a stranger when it came to committing crimes and then going to jail. In 1960, she would end up being arrested for owning and managing a brothel. A brothel, guys. And for that, she would be sentenced to 90 days in the Sacramento County jail. And it was not long after being released this last time, she would be arrested yet again for vagrancy and was sentenced to another 90 days. And it was after this she kind of, I guess, tried to change up her strategy. She would become a nurse's aide and would care for disabled and elderly people in private homes. It was not long after this job she would find herself starting and managing a boarding house. She would end up divorcing Johansson in 1966 and would marry another man named Roberto Puente, who was 19 years younger than her. Now, this marriage didn't last long. It only lasted like 2 years. She would end up getting married again to a man named Pedro Montavlo. Yeah, many marriages. Not judging, just kind of odd, right? Now, this guy was a violent alcoholic. So because of this marriage would only last for a few months. So after she would ditch that guy, the new husband, she would end up scouring the local bars. Her main targets were older men who were receiving benefits. She would forge their signatures to steal their money. Now, you guys, this lady would go home with these men. She would drug them to where they wouldn't be able to move. They were still conscious, but they would just sit there motionless. They would watch her rummage through their stuff, and she would steal their money and checks. She would get caught for this and would be charged with 34 counts of treasury fraud. It was after this that things would just really start to get bad and the crimes would just continue to get worse. Now, while Dorothea was working at a restaurant, she would meet a 61-year-old woman named Ruth Monroe. They would become friends, and Dorothea would convince her to go into business with her, mainly because she felt like they could make a lot of money. I believe it was a restaurant or like a bar of some kind that they would end up opening up. But not long after opening this new business venture with her new bestie, Dorothea would continue coming to Ruth asking for more and more money. She would say the business wasn't doing too good. And Ruth was pretty well off before she met Dorothea. She worked at a pharmacy and was able to take care of herself. But it was soon after meeting Dorothea, she would become broke and would leave her home so she could move in with Dorothea to try to help save money. Now, one of Ruth's sons would come home to visit her every day after work to make sure she was okay. He knew she was down, who wouldn't be in that situation. So he would go and check up on her. And every day, Ruth would have this weird drink in her hand. Now, he thought it was weird because Ruth couldn't drink alcohol. I thought he said something like she was either allergic to it or there was just something about the alcohol that would make her really sick. So she usually avoided that stuff. She would tell her son that it was a concoction that Dorothea mixed up to help calm Ruth's nerves over losing the business. And one day he would come to visit her like usual, and he didn't see her. So he would ask Dorothea, where is she? And she told him that Ruth was upstairs in her room laying down because she wasn't feeling well. So she said to just don't bother her, let her rest. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna go check on my mom. He goes in her room and sees her laying down on her bed. He goes over to her and she kind of looks at him, but she doesn't say anything. She's motionless. He said he saw a single tear fall onto her cheek. He told her that she'll be okay because Dorothea was taking care of her and she'll feel better soon. It was the very next day. Dorothea would call his sister and told her that Ruth died. Dorothea told them that Ruth left her everything. Ruth left Dorothea everything. And that they needed to come and get her purse. But whenever they went to go pick it up, it was pretty much empty. There was like nothing in there. So how messed up is that? The sad thing is that Dorothea told the police that Ruth was depressed from losing all that money on the business that she decided to take her own life. They would determine that Ruth overdosed on codeine and Tylenol. And the police believed Dorothea. They had no reason not to. And then it was just a few short weeks later, a man named Malcolm McKenzie would accuse her of drugging and stealing from him. So soon after that, she would be convicted of 3 charges of theft on August 18th of 1982 and was sentenced to 5 years in jail. And this is when she would start a pen pal relationship with a retired man from Oregon named Everson Gilmuth. Everson had a habit of writing letters to women in prison. Now, okay, listen. If you're bored and lonely, please find a better hobby. The people that are in prison are there for a reason. I promise your soulmate is not there. Trust me. Anyways, they would start to mail these letters back and forth. When she was released in 1985, after only serving 3 of her 5 years, Everson was waiting for her in a red 1980 Ford pickup. It wouldn't be long that they would start the wedding planning. They would end up renting the upstairs area at 1426 F Street home in Sacramento. Now, I believe that her nephew owned this home, but she was living there with him, and then he eventually moved out, and that's when she would take over the home, but would still pay him rent each month. So it was in November of that same year in 1985, Dorothea would hire a local handyman whose name was Ismael Flores. She had him put up some wood paneling in her home, and he gave her a pretty good deal. She only had to pay him like $800 for the paneling job. Well, Ismael was looking for a decent truck and saw that she had one. She told him he could have it, and you will never guess what truck that was. So she would sell him the 1980 Ford pickup and told Ismael that it belonged to her boyfriend in Los Angeles and he no longer needed it.
That's suspicious.
Ismael was more than happy to get this truck from her, and in return, she would ask him to do a little favor. She needed him to build her a box. She said it was for store books and other random items. You know, nothing important, but it had to be specifically 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, as well as 2 feet deep. He never questioned her and just did what she asked. The next day, he brought her the box he built. She would fill the box on her own and then would nail it shut. She then asked him one more favor, one more itsy bitsy favor, and that was to take the box to the local storage depot. Again, he did it, no questions asked. He even had a neighbor help him load up this box into his new truck. Dorothea decided to go with him. I'm assuming this is to make sure he didn't get curious, but told him that she just needed to get out of the house, you know. It's too stuffy in there and she's bored. While on the way to the depot, she quickly changed her mind and told him to stop just off the Garden Highway in Sutter County and told him to just dump the box by the riverbank. Now this he did question her about as to why she would want to do this, you know, because it's weird. And she explained that the contents were mainly junk and should have been dumped anyway. So he thought to himself, okay, good enough excuse, and dumped the box. They would return back to her home and would have a few drinks. It wouldn't be but a month later, on New Year's Day in 1986, a couple fishermen would be near the box and realized it smelled really bad and was half submerged in water. They went to tell the local police about what they encountered, and when the police got there, they would open the box and found the remains of Everson Gilmuth. He was dressed in his underwear, wrapped in a white bed sheet, and was bound with a black electrical tape. His body showed no signs of wounds and was decomposed beyond the point of recognition. The only distinguishing feature was his wristwatch. Now, since he was unidentifiable, he was labeled as a John Doe for 3 years. With Everson gone, Dorothea was free to collect on his pension and would write letters to his family explaining why he wasn't around. She would tell them it was because he was very ill. Now, over time, Dorothea would have around 40 tenants living with her. Now, these people were homeless and they were mainly alcohol and drug addicts. She would collect the mail before anyone else could, and she would cash their pension checks and give them each a small portion and would pocket the rest. Now, some of these people would get put in jail for being out of control, and she would pocket all of their money when they were gone. Now, in the following months, more and more reports of disappearances would be filed of people who had lived with Dorothea. But remember, these types of people who were living with her, they had problems. They were struggling. So it was easy for her to say that they left and just never came back. A 77-year-old woman named Betty Palmer, who was a resident in Dorothea's home, would be reported missing on August 19th after not returning home from a doctor's appointment. Many weeks later, Dorothea was in possession of an ID that had Betty's name on it, but it showed Dorothea's picture, just so she could collect the benefits. Then, in February of the next year, Dorothea would take in a 78-year-old woman who was discharged from the hospital. Dorothea would make up a bed on the couch, which was just temporary, and until she could get her own room. But it wasn't just 2 weeks later, this woman also went missing and was never heard from again. Now, there were many more people that would end up going missing after Dorothea would take charge of their finances. I can't go into them all, or this would be a very long video, but it's just very sad that these people would go to her for refuge and instead got this evil, horrible woman who just saw them as a way to pay for her lavish lifestyle. Now, there was a man named Bert Montoya, and he would go to Dorothea's home and soon after would disappear. Now, his social worker would call and check up on him, and one day Dorothea just started telling her that he wasn't home. He had either left to run an errand or went to a doctor's appointment. Then all of a sudden, she would tell her that his family came from Mexico and took him home. Well, the social worker didn't believe her. Because of the complaints of missing people, the Department of Social Services inspector came to the home to inspect it. Now, although the inspector was well aware of Dorothea's past and how she took advantage of her client's benefits, Dorothea was somehow able to lie her way out of trouble. Now, later there would be a field report that would show that the same inspector would declare that the complaints that were filed against Dorothea were unfounded. Because, she's just a sweet old lady trying her best to just help people. Now, the social worker that was for Bert, I think her name is Judy, and she would closely look after Bert. She took care of him, right? So she would go to say that when she first met Dorothea, she played herself as a 70-year-old woman, but in fact, she was the same age as the social worker who was in her 50s. So there's that. Now, when Judy would ask what interested her in taking care of these people, she would answer and say that she was just a wealthy woman who wanted to help. Yeah, okay. Well, after Bert disappeared, Judy would become concerned that something more sinister was happening in this home. There was another social worker whose name was Peggy Nickerson, and she would always send her clients over to Dorothea, but she would become more and more suspicious. So she would end up stop sending her clients over as a precaution because, her people were disappearing. Every time she went to Dorothea's house, people would disappear. Probably a good thing she did that. Now, it would be on November 7th that Judy would come to visit Dorothea's home to see Bert because she's like, he did not just leave with family from Mexico, right? He didn't really have anyone. So soon after she visited Dorothea's home, she would end up filing a missing persons report for Bert. Now, Judy would state in the report that she didn't believe Dorothea's story about Bert having gone to Mexico. He just wasn't the type to run away without talking to Judy first, She knew him. She knew that wasn't in his character. Now, the police accepted Judy's statement and decided it was probably time to go to Dorothea's home and take a look around. Now, when they were there, the police would question all of the residents, and they would all tell the police the same story, that Bert left with his family to Mexico. Well, one of the residents would end up slipping an officer a note that said, "She told us to lie." Well, after talking with this resident a little further and following up on more complaints, they realized that people believed that she was burying these clients in her backyard after killing them. They would talk with Dorothea, and she would of course deny it. She would even allow them to dig up her backyard to prove that there's nothing back there.
And then we talked to Mr. Sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Sharp says he hasn't seen him for 3 months. But you said the other day.
Yeah,
and
funny.
the social worker hasn't seen him. So who is lying to me? Who is lying to me, Dorothea?
Well, I'm not. He was there Saturday and Sunday.
How can Mr. Sharp...
Well, he doesn't even associate with the other people.
Mr. Sharp also told us that you had told him to lie
I did not.
about saying that he was there, because he later told us that you told him to lie.
One of the officers in the Netflix documentary that I watched about this case would say that as they were digging, he would look up and would see Dorothea creepily watching them, and that she looked nervous. Now, soon after this, they would find their first of many dead bodies that were buried in her yard.
Mr. Sharp says that Ben was missing the same time as Montoya. The social worker says she was up in contact with Montoya up till about 3 months ago.
Okay.
And she says she has not heard hide nor hair from him.
Well, he really didn't want to see them.
But he'd attempted to, he went to detox on an occasion.
Twice.
Yeah, and he told him at detox, "Take me out of your home. I don't want to live there." And the social worker was on very good terms with him, to where she was...
Yes, Judy.
Right, and when he all of a sudden disappeared, she started thinking, what the heck's going on here? You tell me that the guy was from, you didn't know where he went. I mean, there's a lot of things, Dorothea, that I don't understand.
I don't know where the man was going to take him.
Okay, but I mean, there's a lot, you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of inconsistencies there. Okay.
Over the next several days, they would uncover several bodies that were found in her yard. They would further search the home and found dozens of prescriptions for a tranquilizing drug. After autopsies were done on the bodies that were found, they would discover that they had a large amount of this drug or drugs called flurazepam or Dalmane, but they would also find out that Dorothea had cashed over 60 benefit checks belonging to these deceased peoples after their deaths. Now, what's even crazier is that when they started finding all these bodies, she would of course deny knowing anything, but while they were digging up her backyard, I believe it was not long after finding the first body, she would ask one of the officers if she was under arrest because she needed to go have coffee with her nephew at the hotel shop just down the street. And he told her, at the moment, she wasn't under arrest. She could go for coffee. She's a sweet old lady. Where's she gonna go, right? They technically had no proof that she was the one that buried these bodies. She didn't even own the home. Her nephew did. But still, wouldn't that be suspicious that she was going to go have coffee with her nephew who owned the home and found all these dead bodies in the same yard of the home that he owned? Just kind of throwing that out there.
That's weird.
And I mean, she looked and acted like a sweet old lady. She played the part so well. Well, they agreed, like I said, to let her go have coffee. So one of the officers walked her over to the coffee shop and then walked back to finish digging up the yard. They would go to realize that she'd been gone for a while. They went to check on her and saw that she was nowhere to be found. She ran away. She ran away. She was prepared. She already had a small bag packed and was ready to go. They would release a statewide search and requested help from the FBI to help fix their mistake on letting her go have this coffee. This woman, she wasn't stupid, okay? She'd been in and out of jail. She knew how the policemen worked. So she would go and book a flight to leave LA and would use her own name, which in turn would make the LA police go and check the airport as well as the train stations, but she never showed up because she wanted them to think that she left. But in fact, she was right under their noses. She would end up in room 31 at the Royal Viking Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She kept a very low profile and would stay in her home watching TV, only leaving to get food and then going right back to her room. And soon she would start to get restless. So she would take a cab to a local bar just a couple miles from the hotel, and she would end up meeting a man named Charles. They would have a nice conversation. She would start to complain about how her shoe heels were worn down from walking around town. And you know what? He got right up, took her shoes to the repair shop across the street from the bar, and came right back down to talk to her. He was on it. He came back and they would end up talking about his financial situation. She would find out that he was receiving a sickness type benefit. Well, she would give him tips on how he could increase the amount he's receiving each month by filling out additional forms to capitalize on his condition. He was pretty impressed by how much she knew about all this kind of stuff, but it also kind of made him suspicious. After a few drinks, she would suggest them having Thanksgiving dinner. And the idea sounded appealing to Charles, but it also kind of made him feel uncomfortable because it was soon after that she would start talking about them possibly moving in together. Whoa, lady, we just met. They would continue to talk for hours and made plans to see each other the next day. It would be that same night that he would see her on TV, wanted on suspicion of multiple murders. Now, he didn't want to call the police, so instead he called the CBS News service and spoke with the editor who was assigned to the story, Gene Silver. Now, Gene was a newsman veteran. He listened to what Charles had to say, and then Gene would suggest Charles to watch the new broadcast just to double check and make sure that the woman he had drinks with was Dorothea. So Charles would watch it like Gene suggested, but it didn't help because there were no good pictures on the broadcast that showed exactly what she looked like. So Gene decided that he would bring over photos showing Dorothea just to verify. Now, Charles was hesitant to agree at first that this was the same lady, which does happen with witnesses. They kind of feel guilty about turning someone in, especially if they're nice, because they get it in their mind like, what if I'm wrong? But he wasn't wrong in this situation. So after Charles finally agreed that the woman that was in the bar could very well be Dorothea, he told them where he could find her. Now, Gene got his camera crew as well as the police officers, and they they knocked on the door and she answered. They would ask for her ID and she had no choice but to hand it over. I mean, where's she gonna go? And her license read Dorothea Montavlo, address 1426 F Street, Sacramento. After finding Bert Montoya as well as many other clients buried in her backyard, Dorothea would be arrested and charged with 9 murders and was convicted of 3 of those murders and was sentenced to 2 life sentences. The DA would say she would give these people her sleeping pills and then would suffocate them in their sleep. Then she would hire convicts to dig holes in her yard. She would also put lye in the grave to help them decompose faster. In her trial, all the witnesses that knew her would talk about how she was so caring and helpful to the less fortunate. But then the same people would go to say how she also had an evil side that was drawn out by the stress of caring for the down and out tenants. Dorothea would go to say, and I quote, "I cashed checks, yes, but I never killed anyone. I used to be a good person," end quote. She would later die on March 27th in 2011 at the Chowchilla, California prison at the age of 82 from natural causes. This lady was conniving and crazy, but she was also smart and knew how to get away with stuff for so long. But honestly, if it wasn't for Bert's disappearance and his social worker being persistent, I don't think she ever would have been caught. Or if she would, a lot more people would have died. But that is the horrible story of the granny murderer, Dorothea Puente. Thanks again, Erin, for giving us this recommendation. Let me know what you guys thought of this story, and if you have any other recommendations of people or mysteries you want me to look into. If you enjoy my content, be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Or if you're listening on my podcast, try to leave me a review if you can. Either way, I'm just happy you guys are here watching and listening. I hope you guys have a very blessed day, and I will see you all later. Bye.